Welcome to 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal. I'm your host, Brian Slagel. I am the CEO of Motley Records. The next time you're in Las Vegas, or if you currently live in Las Vegas or the Las Vegas area, you need to visit the Metal Blade Museum. Now, not only are there artifacts from Metal Blade artists like Metallica, Slayer, Cannibal Corpse, Gwar, Lizzie Borden, there's also artifacts from bands that we had something to do with as well, like Guns N' Roses, Megadeth, Alice in Chains, Deep Purple, Thin Lizzy, Alice Cooper, all sorts of stuff. So it's a really great metal museum. It's located right near the Strip in Las Vegas. Also, our retail store is also now in the museum. So you can go pick up your Metal Blade vinyl, CDs, collectibles, shirts, all sorts of cool stuff. Just go to metalblade.com/museum for all the details. And we're in the home stretch here on this podcast. We're getting to 100, and we're getting very close to that. So try to pick some really important things to talk about. And certainly Motley Crue is one of the biggest heavy metal bands of all time. And this record, we're going to talk about the first record, Too Fast for Love. In particular, the amazing song, Livewire, which I'm a huge fan of and got to see them play this way early on. So it'll be fun to talk about this track because it's very important. And to do that, we're going to have the producer of this show, the man who created this show. It lived in his brain and now exists, our producer, Christian Bladt. And we'll have Jay Ruston to talk about the production. But as always, we begin with our good friend, the doctor of metal. He's written 150 books on hard rock and heavy metal, Mr. Martin Popoff.
Ah, yes, the pervasive itch on the music world that is Motley Crue. Livewire. Excellent choice, Brian. This is from Too Fast for Love, the debut. Remember, the debut came out on Leathur Records first, and then they got their deal. So there's some slight changes made as this thing emerges, and Motley Crue becomes a scourge on the world. November 10th, 1981, this is recorded at Hit City West, LA. It's kind of self-produced, I suppose. And a very interesting sound they get on this album. It's a scrappy, punky album, and none more scrappy and punky than this opening track. It's almost like a hardcore riff, almost to the point of a thrash riff, and yet it just becomes kind of a punky, irascible song, kind of reckless abandon. It captures the spirit of the hair metal scene, drugs and drink more than anything. Livewire, I mean, it really does sound like an inebriated sort of song. You've got Tommy Lee's double bass there at the beginning, and then it kind of falls away for the verse, although, the speed is the same. But it's cool that you do get some double bass in here. That's pretty early on for that. You've got that harmonic at the beginning from Mick that gives you that sort of wayward Eddie Van Halen quality. The chorus is really odd on this. You've got that really scrappy 4 on the floor, and it's got this kind of sour melody to it. It's a little despondent almost. It's a little bit almost regretful of the drugs and drink in sort of melodic tone. Vince, throughout this whole thing, he sounds like very, very dangerously on the verge of being flat or sharp. We've got Tommy. You definitely hear Tommy's personality coming through, especially when you get to that break. You've got this phase shifted break, and you hear Tommy's groove and what he does extra on the hi-hat. Throughout, you've got these kind of goofy but memorable drum breaks where you've got cowbell and the cymbal chokes, the stop-start stuff at the very end. So Tommy is kind of like the star of this show, but yeah, very, very odd recording as well. Like I say, it's strange snare sound, very, very guttural, gutted, dirty guitar sound in contrast with Vince's high, clean voice. Of course, we got Nikki Sixx in there as well. Kind of main visionary of the band, I suppose, moving forward, main writer. This was released as the second single from the album. The album goes platinum eventually, but this is more because of the notoriety of the second album, and then all those albums in a row doing great. I think they might even be up to 4 times platinum at this point, if not 3, definitely 3, a whole bunch of them in a row there. A huge, huge band, of course, and 170 million plays on Spotify alone for this song. So this really is the redheaded stepchild of the catalog. It's weird. It stands in complete contrast to everything else they would do. It just sounds like a whole different personality, almost like Aerosmith 1 versus the rest of the Aerosmith albums, or Genesis, from Genesis to Revelation kind of thing. But yeah, it's really a different sounding band, real lightning in a bottle, really punky, a lot of, like I say, personality, maybe some Hanoi rocks in there as well. But just an interesting record. Kicks off the hair metal thing in terms of the look of the band. And even that's a very haphazard sort of punk rock thrown together sort of look. I mean, it really, really comes together on Shout at the Devil. But this is a strange, strange album with a lot of charm and personality, like I say, and just a lot of punk rock fire to it. And no song has more punk rock fire on this album than Livewire.
All right, we're going to switch it up a little bit and have Christian Bladt, our producer, come in and comment on Martin's comments. I've never really heard Motley and punk rock put together as much as Martin just did. I thought that was interesting.
I think punk rock has an attitude. I think he's 100% right. What I didn't consider until I heard him say it is that opening riff is almost thrash-like. It's so fast, and that's why it's great. I didn't think of that, but I think that's probably one of the great things about Martin is that he helps us hear things in a slightly different way.
Correct. I don't know if it's a remorseful song quite yet because they were early on in their drinking and partying part, but I mean,
there were so many bottles of Jack Daniels and lines of Coke and needles full of whatever ahead of them that I don't think that they were remorseful yet about any of it.
Agreed on that, but I do love the fire that the band had early on, and I think Martin captured that. And he always comes up with interesting thoughts on this sort of stuff, and always great to have him on for sure. Once again, we welcome back the legendary producer. He's done hundreds of records. You can look it up online. I'm sure you can figure it all out. Mr. J. Ruston, coming from his studio in Southern California. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Brian. Thanks for having me back.
Of course. So we're talking first Motley Crue record, which I have a pretty long history with because I was helping Motley Crue on a variety of levels back in the day, which we'll get into a little bit more when we talk about the song with our guest. Yeah, but I was helping to promote them and doing a whole bunch of stuff. And the famous story was, their managers came and said, "Hey, we have 900 Motley Crue records. What do we do with them?" And I said, "Oh, take them to this Green World company. They'll help distribute them." And if I knew then what I knew now, right? But,
no kidding.
But I'd seen Motley by the time this record came out. I don't know, probably 20 some odd times. So I was pretty familiar with everything. And the original production before Roy Thomas Baker got a hold of it, I thought was actually pretty good, but it was way less heavy than they were live.
Right. Well, I was kind of going to throw a wrench into this conversation and say I actually love the Michael Wagner mix, which is on YouTube. Yep. And the Roy Thomas Baker mix, of course, is what we all know and love. Very bottom-endy, a little muddy when Tommy goes into the double bass in Livewire. If you listen to Michael's original mix, the drums are much more clear. But the problem with Michael's original mix is there's no bottom end. Like it's very thin, but there's this cool, creepy reverb on Vince's vocal, almost like Sabbath style. And Mick Mars's guitar sound, I can't say enough about it.
Yes.
Nobody has his guitar sound. And even the next record after this, he preserved that guitar sound almost identically. It has this like weird honky mid-range to it. I don't know if he's using a Rat pedal or what the hell he's using. I know he used a Marshall for sure because my buddy Jacob did Mick's solo record with Michael Wagner a couple of years ago and said that, he still used that old Marshall and whatever guitar, but there was a variety of pedals. And there was a bass amp in there too. He would split off into a bass rig for part of his sound. But yeah, I always loved the original Michael mix, and a lot of people have that on vinyl. You can get the Leathur Records vinyl if you have lots of money, and you can hear it.
So how many? Because I have a couple copies of the first 900 copies, which
so you have the Michael Wagner mix.
Is pretty rare. So I have that. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it. So I can't remember because they did a repressing of it because there was only 900. And clearly they sold out in like 5 seconds.
Well, they sent most of those to Canada, is what I was told, because as soon as they finished the record and the remix was done, they had immediate dates in Canada, and Doc McGee was like, just send what we have, basically, so you have product.
I don't remember the timeline exactly, but clearly, they had their managers. I knew Kaufman, and they were the guys who asked me, what do we do with them? And it sold out pretty instantaneously. I want to say that they did another pressing prior to them getting signed to Elektra and having it be remixed, but I could be wrong. But I am going to go back and listen to the version that I have and just to check it out, because I haven't listened to it in years and years and years. I'm just so used to the Roy Thomas Baker mix, which I think is great. I think for a first album that their budget was not very big, it was is pretty small, but it didn't sound like a small budgeted record.
No, and you can tell like the Roy Thomas mix has that crunch that he gives everything, where he pins out the Trident and just, smashes the console. You can hear that in that, especially when you go back and listen to Michael's mix. And if you don't want to dig out your vinyl out of your massive collection, go on YouTube.
Yeah, but I want to hear it on my big speakers and everything.
Of course. But yeah, if you have the Leathur Records original print, that's the Michael mix. There are prints of it with the RTB mix, but I don't know. There's so many versions, it's hard to tell. But anyway, but back to Roy's mix, it is thumpy and heavy, and he did something interesting on the guitars, because I'm willing to bet that the guitars are maybe not doubled, because it sounds like fake doubling to me. It sounds like they've delayed one side, put a little chorusing, and Roy's mix is very much balanced, like left and right, whereas the Michael mix is more left-heavy guitar, a little more reverb on the right, almost like Van Halen style.
Yeah, they definitely didn't, like I said, they didn't have a huge budget for it, and I don't think they had a lot of time to record it either. So I could see where, there's just one guitar track, and I'm sure that most of this stuff was done live and
I'm sure
in the studio as well.
And this Hit City Studios where they recorded, never heard of that.
That was a studio back then. I remember that. I think we might have had a couple things that we did in there, and there might have been a couple of bands that did something in there that we know. But yeah, it's just there weren't very many studios back then in LA that weren't crazy, super pricey. So
yeah, you weren't in the record plant or United.
Yeah, and that would those records would cost a fortune. So I remember that. I do remember that studio. I don't think I was ever in it, but I do remember it, and a lot of people were using it back then.
I think it was a Valley studio, like many of them were.
Yes,
but I always, the bass guitar, of course, is somewhat non-existent. You can kind of hear it. It's not, look, Nicky's not known for his bass playing. He's known for his songwriting. He wrote all their hits. But the drums, especially on their RTB mix, are much thicker and compressed and kind of slammed. But I'm quite curious what you'll think when you go back and hear the Michael mix and hear how airy it is and how open.
Yeah, I just remember it being here, listening to it after, seeing them live so many times. It seemed, and maybe it was just the direction they're going in anyway, it just seemed less heavy, because they were pretty heavy live. And this record is not that heavy, but I think it was a planned thing, because at that point there were starting to be other metal bands in LA. I think they were trying to differentiate themselves from everybody else, where Rat stayed pretty heavy for the first couple of records, and Motley started to go a little bit more popular. I noticed on this record, so I'll have to go back and listen to that. But the one thing that you cannot deny about Motley is I do like Mick's guitar playing. And by the way, what an insanely nice guy that he was. He was always super nice to me. So was Vince too, but he was always just a really good guy. And he was much older than the other guys in the band too, so he was kind of
quite a bit older.
Yeah, he was kind of the father figure almost, and was kind of doing a lot of the business back then until Nicky kind of took it all over. But Tommy Lee is just such an unbelievable drum player, and he was
18 when they
he was really young, but you just see he was always great live, but to get that vibe on the record was pretty impressive, because he is really, in my opinion, by far the best musician in that band.
Oh, for sure. And I think him and Mick are both fantastic players, and it's interesting, when I think about Livewire, I actually don't think about double bass, but it is. And,
oh yeah, it's definitely double bass. That kind of drives that song. That's why I like it, I think.
I just, for some reason, I always felt like in my head, I hadn't listened to it in a while. I'm like, oh yeah, like nice 4 on the floor banger. And then I realized, no, wait, that's double bass.
Oh yeah.
And that's what was kind of throwing me on the RTB mix, is it's the kick drum kind of overtakes the mix a little bit. And maybe that's why people like it, but certainly, incredible for an 18-year-old. And I think Mick is an incredible guitar player, and I just love his tone.
I agree.
It's so unique. And this is in the day when a guitar player started playing, you knew who it was, which, of course, is nearly impossible now, sadly. But yeah, back then it was really, you knew Scott Ian, you knew Hetfield, you knew AC/DC, and most certainly Mick Mars.
Yeah, I mean, Mick was always a really good guitar player. I mean, he had a lot to do with Motley Sound, obviously, and just having one guitar player was a little bit different too back then, because almost in the LA scene now, I was trying to think back on that. There's a band called A La Carte that just had one guitar player, but everybody else was starting to get the 2 guitar players in for the most part in the LA metal scene at that point. point. Exciter, of course, which was the band that preceded Motley in the like late 70s. That was George Lynch. And I love that band. They were incredible, but they didn't end up making it. But smartly, Don Dokken stole both Mick, the drummer, and George Lynch and put them in Dokken. And a lot of the songs that Exciter wrote, that George Lynch wrote, ended up on that first record. But I think those are the only real bands with one guitar player back then. There might have been, I mean, Bitch had one guitar player too, now that I think about it. So there were a few.
Yeah, a lot of space to fill. I didn't realize there was a second Exciter. I'm, of course, familiar with the Canadian Exciter.
Yeah, I always have to say not the Canadian one. This is Exciter that George Lynch was in that I think they put out something. He called me one day and said, "Hey, the demos are coming out on something or other." So I was like, "Oh, cool,
interesting."
Because I love that band, and they were another reason why I started a record label, because there's a few bands like that I saw when I was in high school that just didn't end up doing anything. I was like so bummed because they're such big fans of theirs, and I didn't want to see that happen with the LA metal scene that was going on too. So
well, thankfully you did, because we all thank you for that.
At least I could do, but the Motley thing is pretty fascinating. They blew up pretty quickly too. It wasn't, nobody really outside. We did an article with Sounds Magazine in London. My friend John Cornarens and I, along with Sylvie Simmons, who's the writer, LA-based writer for Sounds, and they did like a 3-piece thing again before the record came out.
Oh, wow.
They had a huge buzz in England, but outside of that, not that many people knew who they were. But it was a pretty quick. I remember it was pretty quick for them to go like 0 to 100. I was like, oh, wow, that took off a lot faster than I thought it would.
Well, and what's impressive about it is clearly they knew how to write songs. And I haven't actually looked at the writing credits. I know Nikki is very much one of the main writers in the band. But
I think on this one, they give them all credit. But yeah, it's mostly Nikki, though, writing the stuff.
But Vince's voice, like I always loved his voice, especially in the first 2 records. Once they got to like Theater of Pain and stuff like that, I was much less into Motley Crue. I kind of stopped after Shout at the Devil. But then when, like you said, when we were talking about another record and you brought up the Bob Rock record,
Dr. Feelgood.
Dr. Feelgood, yeah, the production on that and everything. That's what they kind of got me back a little bit again. But
yeah,
Vince's voice on the first 2 records just blows me away. Like he's just got such grit and power. And yeah, his tuning wasn't perfect and all that, but that was part of the sound.
Well, the weird thing too, and this is another reason why I remember it being less heavy, because when I saw them live, he had a bit more of a growl to him live, and the record's very, I don't want to say vanilla, because he sounds great on the record and it totally works, but he lost a little bit of that edge that he had live. And I'm sure that's just what they were looking for at the time. And obviously it works, because I think he sounds great too.
The cowbell breaks too was such an iconic moment.
Love it.
Which, hard to say stuff like that's hard to predict, but when it happens, it's just such a moment, especially when you go see them still to this day.
And this was the song they would always begin, or almost always begin with too. And it was just like so heavy and so fast with the double kick drums. I think they would play it faster live for sure before the record, but
wow.
Just they pretty much start every show with this song. It was just out of the gates, just like, wow. Because I was the first few times, every time I saw them, they were always really, really good live, and they just sounded great and looked great. They had some production going on back then too. Nicky used to, set his boots on fire and all sorts of fun things.
Where would you mostly see them? Like the Whiskey or like Country Club?
Troubadour. The Country Club was even open. I'm not sure if the Country Club was even open then, but Troubadour, the Starwood, that's kind of where a lot of people played back then. Yeah, definitely the Whiskey, and Gazzari's, which was the other. Does it exist anymore as a venue?
Yeah, because it became Key Club.
It's Key Club, and it was Billboard Live and a bunch of stuff.
But now it's just called Keys, and it's like a douchey dance club or something.
Oh, yeah, that's sad. But yeah, I would see them on all those clubs, and I would always go there. Famously, the first metal show I ever saw in LA was Motley Crue and Rats at the Troubadour on a Wednesday night for $1.
Wow.
Yeah, it was the first. Somebody said, "Hey, there's local metal bands." I'm like, "Oh, there are," and I went to that show, and I was like, "Oh, wow, there are metal bands here in LA. Who knew?"
That's amazing. What a show!
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, good stuff, man. And once again, thanks so much for doing this. We're winding down the show, but I have a feeling we will be talking to you again before it all ends.
Absolutely, Brian. Thanks for having me again.
Hey, everyone. Brian Slagel here, founder of Metal Blade Records. You know, I spent my whole entire life trying to make metal history and make metal better and promote metal as much as I can. And now there's a brand new way for you to test your metal knowledge and relive those iconic moments. It's called Metal Mondays, the official metal trivia game from Metal Blade and Pantheon Media, and it's free to play right now. Every Monday, a new game drops. From Slayer, Supremacy to Death, Metal 101, 80s, Metal Blade Classics, and tons more. You'll battle it out on the leaderboards, win killer prizes, and even score some exclusive Metal Blade merch. So if you think you know your riffs, your legends, and your deep cuts, prove it. Download Hit Replay on the App Store or Google Play, or head to metalbladerecords.com/Metal Mondays and start playing today. Because in metal, there's no off days. Only Metal Mondays. Metal Mondays. Play loud, play true, and play to win. All right. As we wind down the show, because there's only 100 songs, and at some point we reach 100, and we're getting close to that, I think it'd be appropriate to bring the following person back to the show. You know him from his podcast, The Bladcast, also many other podcasts as well. And he was also Dennis Miller's right-hand man for a long time. And more importantly, he's the creator of this particular podcast. This was all in his head many years ago, and now it's come to fruition. Our great producer, Mr. Christian Bladt. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you for the introduction. And I had the idea, and then you had the idea that made the show better, which was bring in Martin Popoff. Because imagine this show if Martin hadn't been here every week.
Well, that was the Pantheon guys, actually. That was their idea, our distributor. So I can't take credit for anything, really, other than just babbling on and these things.
Well, Martin definitely makes the show better, and you and he are the only ones to be on every episode of this show.
And we're talking early Motley Crue, first album Motley Crue, Livewire. You mentioned that we should probably talk about Motley Crue at some point during this podcast, and we didn't get around to it until now, but we're getting there. We're finally including them, which is important. I mean, they're obviously a hugely important band in the landscape of heavy metal, and they started pretty early, too, for the, as I guess we call it, the new wave of American heavy metal, because they were one of the first bands really, certainly the first band I saw in LA, in 1980, either 80 or 81. I can't remember exactly when that show was. Somewhere I have the ticket stub where it's, Rat and Motley Crue for $1 at the Troubadour on a Wednesday night, but it might have been late 80, early 81. But yeah, big important band. And obviously the first record to me, I think my favorite is probably Dr. Feelgood. That's probably the heaviest, but this first record is still a landmark record because again, it was, it came out previous to me really doing much of anything other than getting the compilation album together. So it's one of the first ever independent heavy metal bands from the US that came out, actually.
Yeah. And, I kind of discover them when they're promoting Theater of Pain on MTV because I'm 9 at that point. So I think the first thing I ever heard might have been Smoking in the Boys' Room, which I'm like, oh, these guys are no good. I like them. They're dangerous and whatever. And then, of course, the ultimate ballad, Home Sweet Home. But you go back to before that, and Shout at the Devil, pretty much it's 1 and 2, Too Fast for Love and Shout at the Devil. Those feel like metal albums. And I do agree with you, by the way. I think that Dr. Feelgood is their best album because that's who they really are. And that's them kind of achieving their highest potential. That's really the peak for me. It starts off really strong with these first two. They kind of lose their way a little bit with Theater of Pain and Girls, Girls, Girls. But Dr. Feelgood, I mean, try to go to a sporting event and not hear Kickstart My Heart, 35 years later, Brian.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this actually fairly soon because we're going to get to Metallica. Enter Sandman shortly. And that album, actually, Dr. Feelgood had a big influence on the Black Album by Metallica because that's one of the records that we all listened to that thought was really good that got Bob Rock the job to produce Metallica and make this amazing record. So there's a little bit of history between those two bands. But I'll talk a little bit about my history with Motley Crue, which goes way back to, obviously when I first saw them playing in the clubs. And then I put out my fanzine, and they, at two managers at the time, Kaufman and Kaufman was the company, and they were kind of bankrolling Motley a little bit. And they would take out ads in almost every single issue of my fanzine. And the initial thought was that they were going to be on the first Metal Massacre as well. But then, things took a turn because they did their own record. And the famous story is the two managers came to my house, my mom's house, and said, "Hey, what do we do with these records? We have 900 Motley Crue records. What do we do with them?" And I said, "Oh, take them to Green World. They're this distributor. I think they might have distributed a little bit of the single beforehand that they put out. But take them over there." And they took them over there. And the next thing they know, they got really big. And prior to that, my friend John Carnarens and I, who was, helped run the fanzine and also had a big part in the first Metal Massacre album, we were both friends with Sylvie Simmons. And Sylvie Simmons was a writer for Sounds, which of course was the big magazine back then. She was the LA-based correspondent. We kind of befriended her, kind of helped her out on some things. And she was the one, with us helping, did this massive spread on Motley Crue in Sounds magazine in London prior to the record coming out. That was kind of their first, I don't want to say big break, but it was the first, like, people in England started to go, "Who is this band? This looks really cool." And then all of a sudden, the record comes out, and then of course the rest is history.
The early part of their history is interesting because, I knew fairly early on that there had been this Leathur Records pressing of Too Fast for Love, which was not what I had heard. And this was, at the time where it wasn't easy to hear that kind of thing. You could, maybe if you were lucky, go to like a convention and buy like a bootleg tape or something like that. So it was always kind of interesting to hear about that. And the idea that they showed up at your house with 900 records that...
they didn't have the records yet.
Oh, they didn't have them yet. Okay.
They said, "We have them somewhere. What do we do with them?" So like I said, if I knew then what I knew now, right?
So you ended up having that version, and then there was sort of a remixed one before it finally comes around, right?
Yeah, so we talked about this with Jay, as you just heard. So there was the original 900 copies, and I want to say that they made another batch of that version, which is the Michael Wagner version. And then when they got signed to Elektra wanted a better sound, I guess upgrade the sound. So they got Roy Thomas Baker to come in. And I know Motley we're all big Queen fans back then. So Motley's a big fan of Queen. And of course, Roy Thomas Baker did Queen. So he came in and did the remix of it. Haven't had a chance yet to go listen to that original mix that we talked about, because it's been a long time to not listen to it, but I do want to go back. But as I mentioned to Jay, when I got the record, like, they were pretty heavy live. Like, I thought they were heavier live. And when I got the record, I remember my first impression was, this is a little, not a lot lighter, but just a little bit lighter than they were live, which I thought was kind of interesting. But still a great record. And I do love this song. This is certainly one of my favorite Motley Crue songs. And just especially seeing them play this live back in the day was amazing.
Yeah, I think even, seeing them slightly more recently, I haven't seen them since their farewell tour, which was about 10 years ago now. And, they've done tons of shows since then.
Which one?
Yeah, well, there was the one where Alice Cooper opened for them at the Hollywood Bowl. That was the one. I'm like, all right,
I was there.
Sure. Yeah, I had to go to that one. And I believe that they still play it. And it's a great opening song for a live performance, but also it's your first record. It's the first track. And it is a great way to just really grab you kind of by the collar and be like, no, this is us. Listen to us. I think the idea of them all being Livewires is fairly well represented in just how raw that first song on the first album is.
Yeah. And again, when I go back and think about it, this is an important record because it was really the first, nothing had come out at that point. I think Mike Varney had done US Metal, and the Metal Massacre record had not been out yet because, again, they were going to be part of it. And then the record came out and started to do pretty well, where it made no sense to really have them on the Metal Massacre because they already knew who they were. So that never happened. So that was a pretty significant thing for a band to be able to do that back then. Luckily for them, they had the management there that had enough money to put them in a studio and make a record, which, again, is kind of a outside the box thinking back then. But no major was going to touch any of these heavy metal bands back then because nobody knew or cared about them. So, but that was their vehicle to get what they wanted, was a major label deal, and obviously, become this massive band.
Well, we're talking specifically about Livewire, but you and Jay were talking about the album itself, and I had the chance to look up that all the songs are written by Nikki Sixx, and then there's 2 co-writing credits. So On With the Show is him and Vince. I think that's a decent end of the album kind of song. It has the right vibe for that. But Public Enemy #1 is co-written by Lizzie Gray, who was a bandmate in London. I don't know if you saw that earlier iteration on the Sunset Strip before they were Motley Crue.
I never saw London because London would play at Gazzari's, and Gazzari's was where all the bands that I didn't like played. And London was a little bit of a lighter band because that was kind of where all these like the real kind of glammy hair bands played at Gazzari's, and most of them were really, really terrible. So I didn't really like the crowd there, so I never went to any of those shows. I stuck with the other stuff. But then when Motley came in, obviously it was a bit different, and I thought they were great. I thought they were really great. But the reason I said that all four guys is because I listened to that song again to kind of refresh on it, just do some research, as they say. Yeah. And I listened to it on Apple iTunes, and iTunes, you watch the lyrics go by, which is awesome. And at the end, it gives the writing credit. The writing credit on iTunes was all four of them.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I mean, maybe that's changed over time, but I think.
But I mean, I know Nicky wrote pretty much everything.
I think the idea that you get the writing credit. This guy, Lizzie Gray, from having been in London on an album that, eventually goes on to sell all those copies. It's sort of like what your buddy Eddie Trunk refers to as mailbox money, because you'll get some royalties, like, all those bands that Metallica covered, like Budgie, and those bands who, made so much more money on Metallica doing their songs than they ever did themselves. So they kind of jumped out. I'm like, oh, who is Lizzie Gray? So I peeled that back, and I'm like, oh, it's a guy who used to be in a band, not just with Nicky, by the way. He was also in a band with Nicky and Blackie Lawless.
Yeah, he was in a bunch of bands back in the day too. So, but yeah, it makes sense. And I think a lot of those Motley songs on that first record were London songs before Motley got them. I think at least 3 or 4 were, and obviously the one that they put on the record was, I guess, one that Nicky and Lizzie wrote together. So, hence he got the credit, but good for him.
I think the interesting thing about the original release, or the earliest release of Too Fast for Love, is that the single they put out is Stick to Your Guns. And when the Elektra version comes out, that song's actually not even on it. So it was good enough to be the single, and then it doesn't even make the record. Livewire is the only official single from the Elektra version. There's a video for it and everything. And, I see this song for the first time years later. So the Motley Crue that I know is the mid 80s Motley Crue. And you see Shout at the Devil, and you're like, how is this the same band, really?
Yeah, right. Well, I'm sure I'm sure the major label wanted to take that song off for whatever reason. They didn't feel it was strong enough, or who knows, whatever these A&R people decide to do. And that was, again, really early on, where I'm sure the label had a lot of say and stuff. As it went on, I mean, really all those bands from the 80s that all got signed to the majors, all were kind of being run by the major labels, which is kind of unfortunate. It worked for Motley. I think Motley got popular enough fast enough that they had a little bit more control. Plus, they had really good management at that time, too. So that helped them to kind of fight the major label battles.
Yeah, and if you read the dirt or watch the movie, you see how early on they go out on huge tours with like Ozzy. And so obviously there's great representation for them that they put out these 2 albums. They go out on huge tours and then kind of immediately get a lot more commercial. I think it evens out for Dr. Feelgood, but I guess that the substance abuse really is the problem for those middle years, isn't it?
Yeah, those guys. I mean, they had a reputation even before then that they like to party a lot. And you can do that when you're really young, but as you get older and you get too much more into that stuff, it can affect a lot of things. We've seen that happen a million times. They're certainly not the only band that has struggled with that. There's quite a few. But they were. I mean, it was part of the image, and that was part of definitely the Hollywood scene back in the day. There were a couple of scenes. There was that definite party scene, which I wasn't really involved in. But then when we got the metal scene, which came in with Bitch and Armored Saint and Metallica for a minute and all those bands, we all used to hang out. Everybody sort of liked to drink a lot, but I don't think any of us did any sort of drugs at all. I never did, certainly. A little bit, I guess. But
but I mean, to do drugs at the level that Motley does, you need to have top 10, 20 selling albums, and then that's the only way you can keep up. That was a problem for Aerosmith. They started selling records, and then they could afford their habits. But I did think it was really important to talk about Motley because this album in particular, the song in particular, is kind of among the heavier of this scene. We haven't really talked much on this show about what, again, your buddy Eddie Trunk likes to call 80s hard rock and heavy metal. People derisively call it hair metal. I think that there is a lot of that you could push aside, but there's so many great bands with great songs that we should certainly at least acknowledge it. And even if we're only talking about Motley, I think that scene is such an important part of what becomes heavy metal.
Yeah, I mean, well, it also was the demise of heavy metal in the late 80s when all this garbage came out. And I don't know, like Motley and Rat, I guess they eventually became part of that scene just because they were, stuck in there by other people. But those bands weren't really hair metal bands to me. They were they were heavy metal bands that became more hard rock bands and hit driven. And we were supposed to talk Rat, but Stephen Piercy, we couldn't get his schedule and our schedule apparently to work. But
once a rock star, always a rock star, Brian.
But hey, I give him credit. He's in the he has a great role in the Metal Massacre documentary movie, so he did us a solid there, and he's a good guy. But yeah, I think my feelings on the hair metal stuff is like, I don't like most of it. It's just, I'm just not into that. And again, I don't think that it should be included in stuff like this, but certain things are. I mean, Motley's fine. Motley has some very important songs. And again, just the fact that they were literally the first independent heavy metal album that came out by a band was, hugely important. It's obviously set the stage for, everybody else doing independent releases after that. But yeah, Motley's great. Rat's great. I love Cinderella. Skid Row, they get thrown in there a little bit. I like Skid Row as well, but pretty much the rest of it, I have no use for it. And again, it ended up killing metal because it just got so big and flamboyant and over the top, and the songs were terrible, and half those bands didn't even play on the records. And, that's why when grunge came in and kind of killed it, it needed to be killed. It needed to go back underground and reinvent itself, which it did, obviously. Yeah.
I think grunge is more of a reaction to sort of the far end of the extreme. You can point to, ability for talented musicians like the guys in Winger, but they're Winger. And you had years of Beavis and Butthead making fun of them, and it doesn't really help.
As they should.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. So you have that, but probably really nice guys. I know that Kip was in Alice Cooper's band.
Kip's a good guy. He incredible bass player. He was a studio bass player for a long time. But I think the problem with all that hair metal stuff is that these bands were just chasing hit songs, and they weren't really on a creative level. We're just doing formulated stuff. But this is, again, I can't really blame the bands as much because this is what the major labels wanted, and that's what they were spending money on, and that's what was working for them at the time. So of course that's where all that stuff came from. But I even hate that they call it metal, because to me none of that stuff is metal. Just pop music, really, just pop music with guys with long hair.
Yeah, no one should mistake Nelson for any kind of metal. I think they have really nice voices. I can certainly say that for them, and they seem to have a good sense of humor about themselves now. But Motley really was metal, hard rock.
Yes.
It was all of it. And they lived the lifestyle. They had the sound. How was it to kind of watch them go from Shout at the Devil before they get to Dr. Feelgood? Were you surprised? Was it maybe not entirely for you? What did you think for sort of those middle few years of the 80s?
I love this record. I love this record. I think this is a great record. I think the song is an amazing song and definitely worthy of being in this podcast, 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal, for sure. The other records, really until Feel Good, I liked a few songs on there, but I wasn't like a huge fan of the whole records necessarily. And again, they were kind of caught in the major label world, and I was there. I've seen it. I know I have a million friends that were there, and it's a difficult world to be very creative in because you have to adhere to what the major labels want. They want hit songs. That's kind of what they're trying to do. And, there's certainly some songs on those records that are heavier and more creative, but really until they got to Feel Good, which was kind of the record where just everything just kind of came together and they made this incredible record. And it spawned Bob Rock to make the Metallica record as the biggest heavy metal album of all. Well, that and AC/DC are the two biggest, I guess. But
of albums with black covers, and
I think that was
Metallica and Back in Black. Yes.
Yeah. And that was probably the best tour that they did too, because before then, like the early stuff, they were great. But then, as you mentioned, the substance abuse and other things kind of come in, and, the drinking and everything. So some of the shows weren't as good afterwards. But for whatever reason, everything just kind of clicked on that Feel Good tour. And clearly they were much healthier at that point. And I saw that tour several times, and they were on fire. I mean, Motley at their height live was always really good. And I saw that just when they played in the clubs early on. They were on, and they had a great show back then. And, they were probably one of of the more professional bands in that early 80s scene. Plus, especially Nicky's been doing this for a long time. So, he kind of has a whole image and show that he wanted to do. And yeah, those early days of Motley, they were awesome. Like I said, that first show that I went to with Motley and Rat, I was just blown away. I was like, oh my God, these bands are amazing. Like, how did I not know there's a scene in LA? But I found out that there was.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you're talking sort of about major labels chasing the next thing, so you're at one point you're chasing the next Motley, and then it gets watered down a little bit where you're chasing the next Warrant, and then all of a sudden you're like, no, actually we want the next Soundgarden. We don't want any of that. So those bands, some of them putting out good albums and at least having some good songs, all get caught in the middle of probably the worst time to sign a major label deal was probably 1992, maybe 1991, and you try to put it out in 1992 because established bands would put out good records, but it didn't matter at that point. Like nobody wanted to hear a new Tesla record in 1994 except me.
The funny story about how quickly things changed. I was in New York at the Columbia label at their headquarters, and I walk in and there's a gigantic cherry pie poster behind the reception desk. We had reception desks back then. And about 6 months later, and there's probably, I don't remember exactly when it was, like 89 or something probably. And 6 months later, I went back to the same office and the cherry pie was gone and it was a gigantic Soundgarden poster was up there. It's like, oh, have things changed now? So it goes fast.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, I think Motley had the talent, they had the songs, they had the personality, they were the whole package. So it was easy for them to kind of transition into, yes, being more mainstream, but then ultimately making their best record. But in terms of top to bottom, song after song, I still prefer this one. This is the Motley album I would want to listen to the most. And if I'm still in a Motley mood, I'm going to go on to Shout at the Devil. For my personal tastes, they peaked early, but I also love Dr. Feelgood. I think that's got a couple that I might hit skip if I was listening to it on a CD.
Yeah, and this song in particular has a lot of stuff going on. You've got the double kicks that Tommy Lee was doing, which is, that wasn't a normal occurring thing at that point, but he's such a great drummer. And the other interesting thing about Motley in the early days was really Mick Mars was the guy kind of more or less doing all the business. He was much older than the other guys were. Yeah. It was clearly Nicky's band in terms of the music direction and stuff, but Mick was I dealt with him and the managers way more than I dealt with Nicky in terms of any, just because we book shows for them, and obviously they're in the fanzine all the time, and helping them with the articles and all these different things. And Mick was like always been the nicest guy. He was a super sweet guy, and he was great. And it was just interesting to see the dynamics back then because this is just a band starting out. And I think once the band got bigger, obviously Nicky had a much bigger role, and he kind of became the guy that's running the band. But back in the days, it was way more Mick Mars than it was Nicky. But again, Mick Mars was probably, I want to say he was 10 years older than those guys, at least 7 or 8. He was older than all of us were. So he was a wise old man at that point. But really good guy and great guitar player.
Okay, I looked it up. Nicky Sixx was born 1958, Mick Mars 1951. So a solid 7.5 years older. And I mean, that's probably at least one of the main factors as to why he's not there anymore. I know there's other things that get into it, but by all accounts, Mick was just like, I can't do this anymore. They did that farewell tour, and then everybody else was like, hey, we liked making money, we'd like to do it again. And I guess they did that stadium tour where I saw them, but then it was just, I guess that was enough for Mick. And John Five's a great guitarist, he's just not Mick Mars.
Yeah, and I mean, Mick had always had some health problems, and they were getting worse and worse and worse, unfortunately. So I don't think he could really, the rigors of the road, go out there and do it anymore. But at this point, a lot of bands have done final tours and then come back. And I mean, I get it on a couple of levels. One, you miss the money because a lot of times these bands go away and the fans want to see them, and so the money goes way up, and it's hard to say no to that. And number two, it's just, how else can you go out on stage, whether it's 5,000 or 15,000 or 20,000 or beyond that, and get that sort of rush of adrenaline? And you miss that. That's why athletes, when they see these guys retire, they're crying because they're never going to have, after you retire as an athlete, you can't play in front of, stadiums and arenas anymore. So you're gonna miss that. I get it.
Yeah, especially when, you carve out some degree of a solo career like Vince Neil did. But then there's also like, okay, I'm doing all right. The real money was with Motley, and it sort of is always about the name that you can put on the marquee. I think it's like if you're still touring as yourself, you're like, yeah, I'd like to make, I don't know, 5-10 times as much money. So let's get Motley back together. And you always have that generation of people who never got to see them, you know?
Yeah, and that's the other thing that, I kind of want to, initially when these bands started to lose members and fill them with other people, I was kind of like, no, like, when Tommy Thayer, who's like a great guy and a really great guitar player and all that, but when he came in and was Ace, it's like Kiss wasn't the same to me. And but I'd seen them so many times with Ace that you just kind of get used to it. But I understand that there's a lot of people that never saw Kiss before and they want to see Kiss. And I was a big advocate, when Vinny was alive in Pantera, like, hey, just go out and play for the fans. Fans want to see this. But he didn't want that to happen, so it never did. But it is now. But I'm happy for fans that are big fans of these bands that never got to see them. I can see them now. So look, sports teams have different players every year. I've gotten used to bands having different players, and as long as it's good, it works. I mean, look at Rush now. Rush never thought they would ever tour again. They're playing incredible, and Annika's amazing, and it's great for everybody.
I think Rush is specifically one where you understand it's like, well, there'll either be somebody else behind the drum kit or there will be no Rush. I think that always makes it easier. That's the various iterations of Queen now with Adam Lambert, but Paul Rodgers before that was like, well, there's no Freddie, so let's see what we can do. And I never had any chance of seeing Queen because they didn't tour in the U.S. I was still like 8, I think, the last time they toured. So there is a lot of that, and I do understand the appeal. I mean, Pantera is a great example. The Pantera that's out there now is because the band only continues to get bigger, and there's people would just love to see some version of it live. I don't know. It seems like Motley does at least decent enough business. I mean, I know they have like a package tour this summer with Tesla and Extreme, and those are all bands that I like. So I feel like I could probably see Motley again sometime this summer.
Yeah, they keep coming back, so the money's got to be there, and I'm sure the fans got to be there. And again, you've got a constant amount of new fans that haven't seen them before. And like I said, I get it. I used to be really like, they lied to us and all this sort of stuff. But after a while, you just go, I've just seen it happen so many times. And especially when you start to realize the dollar figures too. I mean, it's hard to turn down that kind of money when you're just like, okay.
Yeah,
I get it. I totally get it.
There's just those handful of examples that the other guys in Skid Row don't care how much money you're putting in front of them. They don't want to be on stage with Sebastian Bach. And Queensryche's another one, I guess, where they're just like, they would rather not have Jeff on stage with them. They understand that there's a lot of money, but we'll just keep doing our modest business and having fun.
Yeah, I mean, there's those dynamics. I get that too.
Sure.
But it happens. But look, this is a phenomenal Motley Crue record, and definitely we needed to talk about that. So thank you for pushing me to. It was always on my agenda to get to it, but these things go by so fast, and you're realizing, like, oh my gosh, we're almost up to 100, so we got to get this stuff in. So thank you for that. Thank you for everything you've done for the show, the production, all the hours you put in to make this thing really good. Much appreciated. And you'll be part of the next venture as well, the next podcast that you guys will hear about very soon. So thanks again, Christian. Appreciate you doing this, and we'll see you guys later. Well, that was fun. Got to thank everybody. Got to thank Christian Bladt, of course, the man who invented this show and is the producer and a guest from time to time as well. He's a big Motley fan, so it's fun to talk to him. Jay Ruston, as always, and of course, Mr. Martin Popoff, who's been on every episode and will be part of the next podcast that I'm doing, which will have some information on that fairly soon. It's going to start in early 2027. As soon as I get information, I'll let you guys know. Thanks to Lizzie Borden for our theme song. And again, Mr. Christian Bladt as the producer. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next episode.
100